Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. And friends, today I want to discuss with you an idea that has been floating around the Jewish world since at least the Middle Ages. An idea that has not only left the world on its own ethically, but has virtually nullified the whole purpose for the Jewish people being appointed for a special task in the first place. And friends, that's the idea that the Jew is intrinsically special, which is what ultimately occurs when you mix genetics with religion. You no longer just have a group of individuals claiming a land, language, and culture. No, now you have all these, but in some way, all these are endorsed by God. However, in the case of the Jewish people, it was God himself who graced them with all these, but not because of who they were, but rather because of God's ultimate plan for humanity that initially did begin with Abraham, but was meant to encompass and include all willing to emulate Abraham, making the adherents of the faith of Abraham, either genetic descendants or spiritual adherents, members of a people united by faith and action, and not blood. However, today, friends, I think I could help put the issue into perspective for you. It's the idea that the Jew is intrinsically special. Now, where did this concept originate from? And friends, the short answer is Agadot, in other words, folklore. However, friends, I'm sure that the authors of these tales themselves never would have imagined that they would have been used to justify the creation of some Jewish genetic identity. But yes, friends, ultimately it was Agadot and what is known as Midrashim, Jewish folklore, that started all this. And alongside Talmudic folklore, I also include the Zohar and earlier and later works that continue building on such folklore, ultimately deifying these tales and creating the spiritual dogma we have today. In other words, friends, these works and ideas that originated in the creative minds of men are quoted alongside the words of Torah itself as almost an extension to the Torah, when they actually have no authority in the Jewish religion. And the major problem is that this is when the sin of adding to the text of the Torah actually begins to take shape. When people not only forget to, but intentionally fail to make a distinction between Torah, i.e. the revelation we received from the Almighty, and the words and ideas of men. Not to mention that even the Torah itself contains Pesukim warning us, actually twice, not to add to the commands within it, which does not only include the practical mitzvot, but even those mitzvot dealing with metaphysical beliefs and ideas sanctioned within the text itself. And friends, the failure is really on the part of the rabbis nowadays, who fail to make a distinction, mainly because they were never taught there was a distinction either. And this is why it is so difficult for a Jew to explain what he or she believes without first completely exhausting these made-up works that virtually always contradict each other, ultimately making not just our theology, but also our religion look ridiculous. And friends, another example of something that may at one time have been accepted as folklore, but is now theologically accepted as dogma, even though it in no way goes along with the Torah's narrative, is the myth that the Torah, both written and oral as we have it today, was not only in existence before the world was created, but was also handed over to Adam, giving the reader the understanding that Adam in some way was the first Jew, or the first in line of intrinsically special individuals. Then, as they teach, Adam transmitted it down through his descendants, through Noah, and then through his son Shem, who, by the way, folklore teaches, even opened up his own yeshiva with Ever, a yeshiva that of course taught Torah before the Torah was actually given. And note that even these Agadot are further modified by later rabbis to fit their own ideologies. Like some teach that the yeshiva actually taught the 7 laws, which is another nonsensical belief, mainly because the Torah never taught their existence, the existence of these 7 laws. And when the 7 laws only later existed as a set of laws developed by the court to judge non-Jews living in Jewish lands. But regardless, friends, all this lays down the mystical idea that a specific line was endorsed by the Almighty to ultimately be his. Now, many different variations of this story exist that confuses the listener even more, but regardless, when these ideas are studied alongside the written Torah text, This is when the distortion and the confusion begins to set in, which is basically what Rashi did by attaching every Aggadic tale alongside of the narrative, the Torah narrative. Again, not just as folklore, but rather as an extension of the Torah narrative, which we later learned from his grandson, the Rashbam, that he rejected ever writing because, as the Rashbam explained, that initially Rashi set out to write a Perusha only regarding the Pashat, the simple meaning of the text, but later abandoned his initial pursuit and based his commentary on folklore instead. Which is why, as the Rashbam explains, that his commentary, the Rashbam's commentary, was the commentary that Rashi intended to write, again, only on what is considered the Pashat, the literal narrative found in the Torah. And friends, another example people use in their search for intrinsic worth is with the story of Avraham Avinu. Because honestly, if the Jewish people or the belief system exists only within a bloodline, we should see this relevant in Parashat Lech Lecha, where the Torah first describes Avraham, the individual who eventually becomes the father of our faith. So, how does the Torah describe Avraham? Easy, as an idol worshiper, the son of an idol worshiper, and that's all. However, friends, later creative Jews could not leave well enough alone. What do I mean? Friends, that Jewish folklore and legend began to add to the narrative. No, friends, Abraham wasn't just Abraham anymore. As the Midrash teaches, Abraham was born under a lucky star, just like someone else in history. I mean, literally under an actual huge star to signify his supposed special birth. He is then even thrown into a furnace and doesn't burn, to again show us how special he is. And again, all this does not appear in the Torah. He then supposedly learns in his uncle Shem's yeshiva and is even known for destroying idols with his own hands. No, friends, please don't think that I believe in the slightest way that the authors of such Midrashim ever thought that the Jewish people were nothing more than a religion either, but rather only that with their well-intentioned efforts, they made the internal struggle that ultimately defines all of us in the case of Abraham secondary and even sometimes unimportant. Now, I believe that the text goes out of his way to let us know that Abraham had no intrinsic value to him, that there was nothing intrinsically unique or special in his nature, and that any one of us could do the same if, of course, we would be willing to sacrifice as much as he did. And friends, this is one of the main reasons people attack me, because they make no separation between Torah halacha from Midrash and Agadah. So they hear me teach Hilchot Shabbat in one video explaining the binding decisions by Chazal regarding the keeping of Shabbat, and in another video they hear me dismiss the metaphysical opinions about the supposed complexity of the Creator or some hidden narrative that does not appear in Torah, and then assume that I'm either confused or insane. So they say that I insult the sages. And friends, because they make no distinction between what's binding instruction and what's only disposable, in this case, folklore that's only opinion. Even from a logical level, apart that the Torah and the words of our sages teach us how to interpret them, can you really imagine if everything about every topic that a rabbi speaks about is to be considered binding and ultimately dogmatically spiritually true? Couldn't then they, if they wanted to, rewrite our Torah and then justify it all? Wouldn't that ultimately make us make them God? I mean, this is definitely something to think about, friends, which is why the members of the Sanhedrin, i.e. the sages, Chazal, the Mishnaic rabbis, only were given authority to rule on the practical application of the mitzvot and not in any way allowed to establish the metaphysical or what they knew nothing about, like some supposed hidden narrative in the Torah. So please, friends, don't forget to make that separation. Now, going down the line, they go out of their way to teach that Yaakov was also intrinsically special, even though the narrative teaches that he had not yet known the God of Israel. Even teaching that he learned Torah, not just in yeshiva, but all day in his tent. Again, learned Torah before it was even given. Now, one area that Midrashim and ethnocentrists fail to justify is the existence and ultimate spiritual historical demise of his brother Esav and his descendants. Now, regarding the notion of someone like Esav, who was also supposedly born into the covenant and was able to lose their share of the covenant, teaching us that once a Jew or once in the covenant, not always in the covenant, teaching us that this is not something transferable by blood, at least from a spiritual level. And friends, I would literally be here all day detailing the later folkloric texts that have been written to expound the Torah's narrative, like how the Almighty himself forced the children of Israel to accept Torah on threat of death by holding a mountain over them. So much for free will or taking any responsibility for choosing a Torah life. And friends, the nonsense goes on and on. How well-intentioned authors who thought that they were helping the narrative actually ended up corrupting it in the minds of future readers because of their supposed theological embellishments. The problem is, when Jewish history is viewed through such a prism, it's very easy for the primitive mind to assume that nature instead of nurture got them ethically where the Almighty wanted them to be, which is one of modern-day Judaism's last primitive beliefs, the notion of intrinsic value. They fail to understand how the Torah went out of its way to remind the reader that there is nothing intrinsically special in this world, that everything must be earned and struggled for, especially our status before the Creator and among other people. From Abraham choosing to hear and follow that still voice, to Yaakov having to earn every little thing that he ever achieved in his life, even when he supposedly tricked his father into blessing him. From the children of Israel choosing to listen to Moshe and ultimately following God out of Egypt, to they individually deciding to accept Torah and live for a greater purpose. Everything, my friends, is a choice. The Almighty does not give anything away freely, especially your religious status, only because you may have had a mother who may have identified with a certain religion or people. That, my friends, is not only unbiblical but ethically absurd. So much nonsense has been developed by the rabbis throughout the centuries that have no basis in Torah and ultimately hurts the Torah world. And honestly, it's really our fault for deifying their words to begin with regarding belief and not just practice. So we really just can't blame them. Because again, friends, the court, our sages, Chazal, were only entrusted to establish practical laws to be able to fulfill Torah commandments in a unified manner, and never to establish metaphysical reality with whole new allegorical interpretations of the Torah text, which ultimately ends up changing the narrative within the Torah itself. Because, friends, by the simple fact that a non-Israelite can join the people of Israel, and according to the plain understanding of the text, an Israelite can be cut off from his people, this should teach us that there is nothing genetically or intrinsically spiritual regarding the descendants of the children of Israel, especially today, so many years separated from the original Israelites. I mean, please remember that about 90% of the Jewish world is Ashkenazi, i.e. not Middle Eastern. In other words, with almost full European features, i.e. descended from Gentile converted stock. And regarding an Israelite being cut off, just look up the word karet, to be cut off. In Torah, it appears over 100 times in Hebrew. Now, I know that some have tried to interpret it to mean something else, but we cannot escape its simple meaning, right? Ein mikra yotze midei peshuto. And friends, I know that many have never thought about it, what I'm mentioning today, and will just decide to follow what their rabbi or some earlier rabbi may have said on the issue blindly. But don't forget that it should be Torah that is used to validate the rabbis and not the other way around. And I'm telling you this, friends, and I'm no Karaite. In other words, I believe in the oral law, and I believe in the halachic authority of Chazal, i.e. the court or the sages. I'm telling you that everything that we choose to call true, divine, or inspired must be sanctioned by the pages of Torah, or then it's just fallible opinion.